Why are some wrongful death cases worth more than others? As a wrongful death attorney, I have spent my career studying and evaluating wrongful death cases that have had judgments and settlements and verdicts. And I have come to the conclusion that there are three main factors that are the driving force behind some of the higher, more valuable wrongful death cases. And so I wanted to share that with you. There are three main factors that really determine whether a case is going to be an outlier, which is a case that is of $10 million, $30 million, $100 million, versus what would be considered an average wrongful death case value, which in Florida is roughly right around $2 million. What factors determine whether or not the case is going to be an outlier? The first factor involved, and the most important factor that I have found, is kind of counterintuitive, because you wouldn't think this would be the biggest factor, but it is. And that is, how clearly can I, as the attorney, prove the negligence on the part of the defendant, the bad actor who had caused the wrongful death? And so what I'm looking for, the first thing that I'm looking for as the attorney, is rules that have been broken by the defendant, by the person that caused this accident or crash, or the doctor or whoever it is that is the wrongful actor, and the rules that have been broken. And I'm also looking for evidence that the wrongful actor knew that they were breaking the rule when they broke it, and they also knew that they were endangering the lives of others when breaking the rule. So an example of how this is done is through trucking cases. Because in trucking cases, we have the Federal Motor Carrier Safety Regulations, which is a code of conduct that has in it a code of conduct for truck drivers and trucking companies. And this is a very specific code of conduct. And so what I do every time I get a trucking case involving a wrongful death is I will go through the Federal Motor Carrier Safety Regulations, and I will look at all of the rules that have been broken by the truck driver and by the trucking company, which have led to the accident or the crash that caused the wrongful death of my client. The more rules that I can show were broken, and the more I can show that the trucker and the trucking company were aware of these rules and should have been aware of these rules, and that they knew that the purpose of the rules was to prevent the injury and death of people like my client's loved one, the more likely I am to be able to get a bigger settlement and a bigger verdict. Okay, so that's number one, is how clear is the liability? How clear is the evidence of the liability? All right, number two factor in determining whether your case is an outlier or whether it's more falls into the category of an average case is the age of the deceased. So the age of the person who has died is a major factor. The younger the person that died, the more likely you are going to get one of the outliers, a settlement of $10 million, $20 million, $30 million, $50 million, $100 million. And the reason for that is because one of the biggest factors in determining the value of a wrongful death case is the mental pain and suffering of the survivors. And as everybody knows, and you don't have to do anything to convince a jury of this, that the loss of a child who has barely had a chance to live is probably the worst pain that anybody can endure. As parents of children, and I have 3 daughters of my own, everybody knows that we're expecting to we're expecting to die before our children do. And so when our child dies before we do, that is a major, major loss. And it's even worse when our child dies to the carelessness of another, and when we know that it was due to the carelessness of somebody who had rules. They knew there were rules that were in place to protect the lives of others, and they violated the rules anyway. That even adds more pain and suffering. That adds to the horrible pain and suffering. Of course, it's terrible to lose a loved one, but when the life of your loved one is ripped away by somebody's negligence, it's even worse. And because of that, Wrongful death verdicts and settlements with involving children are often some of the biggest ones. Okay, so the next factor that is really important in determining the value of wrongful death cases is the amount of money that the deceased person was making or was likely to make in his or her lifetime, if they had lived a full life and their life hadn't been ripped away from them by the negligence of another. So that is what we call loss of either support and services. For example, if you've got a stay-at-home dad and then the mom dies, the dad is entitled to compensation for the support and services that the mom, who was the breadwinner, would have given throughout the surviving husband's lifetime. Likewise, or in addition to that, the estate of the deceased. In other words, every time someone dies, they have an estate. The estate basically consists of their assets minus their liability. So their assets are whatever they own minus whatever they owe. And that's the value of their estate. Well, when somebody dies prematurely due to the wrongful act of another, then the estate is entitled to compensation for the lost net accumulation of the deceased person. In other words, lost net accumulations is basically what all of the money that the deceased person was likely to earn in his or her lifetime minus how much they were likely to spend in their lifetime. So it's all of what they would have earned minus what they would have spent, essentially whatever their net worth would have been at the end of their life minus what they already had at the time of their death would be their lost net accumulations, and the estate is entitled to that. And so if we're talking about somebody that makes a lot of money and has the trajectory of making a lot of money, what we do is we hire an economist who can calculate the trajectory of the deceased person and can calculate how much that money they would have made minus their, they would also evaluate their spending habits. And so minus their spending habits, and they'll come up with a number of lost net accumulations. That number has to be reduced down to present value. And that's a factor that goes into the valuation of the case. So if somebody has lost their life and they are making a lot of money, a doctor, a lawyer, architect, then there's a very high likelihood that their wrongful death case is going to be one of the outliers of could be tens of millions of dollars and over $100 million. Okay, those are just some of the factors. There are so many factors in determining the value of a wrongful death case that every case requires the skill of an experienced wrongful death lawyer. I am an experienced wrongful death lawyer, so you're more than welcome to call me. My name is Jimmy Fasig. I am the senior partner of Fasig Brooks Law Offices. My number is 850-777-7777. If you want to talk to me about the value of your case, I'm more than happy to do so. Again, Jimmy Fasig, 850-777-7777. Thank you.